The year is 1291. The last crusader stronghold in the Holy Land, the city of Acre, has fallen. For 2 centuries, Christian knights had fought and died for this sacred soil, but now the dream was over. Amidst the chaos and the retreat, one group of warrior monks faced an existential crisis: the Teutonic Order. Their purpose, their very reason for being, was tied to the Holy Land. With Acre reduced to ashes, where would they go? What would they become? This is the story of how exile forged a new destiny, turning these defeated crusaders from the desert sands of the Middle East to the dark forests of the north, igniting a new, brutal and often forgotten holy war, the Northern Crusades. Forced from the land they swore to protect, the Teutonic Knights needed a new mission, a new enemy. They found it in the pagan lands of the Baltic. Their zeal, once directed at reclaiming Jerusalem, was now aimed at the tribes of Prussia, Lithuania, and Livonia. This pivot from the Holy Land set the stage for 2 centuries of conflict, conquest, and colonization. It was a crusade not for pilgrimage sites, but for souls and territory, a conflict that would forever reshape the map of Eastern Europe. This is the story of how loss in one war gave birth to another, and how the white mantle with the black cross became a symbol of terror and order in the untamed wilderness of the north. So who exactly were these men who traded the heat of the Levant for the frost of the Baltic? They were the Knights of the Teutonic Order, a unique brotherhood of soldier monks. Imagine a life dedicated to 2 masters, God and the sword. Their days were a stark contrast of devout prayer and brutal combat training. They lived by a strict set of rules, a code that demanded poverty, chastity, and absolute obedience. This wasn't just a military unit, it was a religious calling. This monastic discipline created an unbreakable bond and a fierce fighting spirit. They saw themselves as instruments of God's will, a perception that made them both incredibly effective and utterly ruthless on the battlefield. Unlike other knights who might fight for a king or for personal glory, the Teutonic Knight fought for a cause he believed was divine. Their lives were stripped of personal possessions and worldly comforts. They ate together, slept in communal dormitories, and prayed for hours each day. But when the call to battle came, they transformed. Clad in their iconic white surcoats, emblazoned with a simple black cross, they became one of the most disciplined and feared military forces of the Middle Ages. This combination of religious fervor and military professionalism was their secret weapon. They were a monastic machine built for war, and their next campaign would test that machine to its absolute limit. Their new crusade began in Prussia, a land of dense forests, murky swamps, and fierce pagan tribes. This wasn't a war of pitched battles and noble chivalry. It was a grim, systematic conquest. The strategy was simple and brutal: conversion or the sword. The Teutonic Knights offered the Prussian tribes a choice: accept Christianity and submit to their rule, or face annihilation. To legitimize this war, they secured authorization directly from the Pope. This papal blessing transformed their campaign from a simple land grab into a perpetual holy war. Every year, guest crusaders from across Europe would flock to the Baltic frontier, eager to fight alongside the Order and earn salvation by spilling pagan blood. The conquest was a slow, grinding process. The knights would advance, build a small wooden fort, and use it as a base to pacify the surrounding area. They cleared forests, established settlements with German colonists, and slowly choked the life out of the native Prussian culture. The resistance was fierce. The Baltic tribes were skilled warriors who used the terrain to their advantage, launching guerrilla raids from the cover of the woods. But they couldn't stand against the relentless, organized pressure of the Teutonic state. For decades, the land was soaked in blood, as one tribe after another was subjugated or wiped out. This was the brutal birth of a new crusader state, forged in fire and faith on Europe's northern edge. But how do you hold onto a land that hates you? Conquest is one thing. control is another. The Teutonic Knights knew that swords alone couldn't secure their new domain. Their ultimate weapon of control was not steel, but stone and mortar. They embarked on one of the most ambitious and impressive building programs of the entire medieval period. Across the conquered lands of Prussia and Livonia, a network of formidable castles began to rise from the earth. These weren't the elegant fairy tale castles of France or Germany. These were grim, imposing fortresses built for one purpose: total domination. And they were built with a distinctive material, millions upon millions of red bricks baked from the local clay. This architectural style, known as brick Gothic, became the visual signature of the Teutonic Order. From smaller administrative forts to massive convents housing hundreds of knights, this network of castles allowed them to project power, protect trade routes, and quell rebellions. They were interconnected, forming a web of control that was nearly impossible to break. And at the heart of this web was their grand capital, the colossal fortress of Malbork. It was the largest brick castle in the world, a jaw-dropping statement of power and permanence. It was more than a headquarters. It was the administrative brain of a military theocratic state. The castles were the bones of the Teutonic state, a brick-and-mortar skeleton that would support their rule for centuries. Malbork Castle wasn't just big. It was a masterpiece of medieval engineering and logistics. Imagine a fortress that was also a monastery, a palace, and a military depot all in one. The outer walls enclosed an area large enough to hold a small town. Inside, the high castle served as the monastic heart, with its own chapel and chapter house where the order's leadership made their decisions. The middle castle was the administrative and residential hub, with grand halls for receiving ambassadors and chambers for visiting dignitaries. The scale of it was meant to awe and intimidate. It declared to the world that the Teutonic Order was not a temporary raiding party. They were here to stay. The construction of Malbork and its sister castles was a monumental undertaking. It required immense resources, skilled labor, and a level of organization that was unparalleled. These fortresses were the physical embodiment of the Order's ideology: discipline, order, and unshakable power. They stood as defiant red giants against the green landscape, a constant reminder to the local population of who was now in charge. Through this network of brick and stone, the Teutonic Knights didn't just conquer a land. They remade it in their own image, turning a pagan wilderness into a highly organized Christian state. Their crusade had succeeded, not just by the sword, but by the trowel. And so, from the ashes of Acre, the Teutonic Order rose to create a powerful and unique state on the Baltic Sea. Their story is a dramatic saga of faith, ambition, and brutality, a chapter of the Crusades that is too often overlooked. While the Teutonic Knights carved out a state in Prussia and battled for the Holy Land, a new storm was gathering in the east. Their ambition knew no bounds, and soon their gaze fell upon the wealthy Russian principalities. But in the Republic of Novgorod, a young prince was rising, a figure destined to become a legend. This was Alexander Nevsky. More than just a ruler, he was seen as the defender of the Orthodox faith against the Catholic crusaders. The knights, confident in their heavy armor and divine mandate, saw the fractured Russian lands as ripe for conquest. They underestimated the will of the people and the brilliant military mind of the man who would come to be known as the Winter King. The stage was set for a clash of civilizations, a holy war on the fringes of Europe, where faith, steel, and ice would decide the fate of a nation. The year is 1242. The air is so cold it burns your lungs. Before you stretches the vast frozen expanse of Lake Peipus. On one side, the pride of European chivalry, the Teutonic Knights, a wall of iron, steel, and white cloaks adorned with black crosses. Their heavy warhorses stomp impatiently, their breath misting in the frigid air. They are the hammer of Christendom, seemingly invincible. On the other side, a smaller, more lightly equipped force of Russian warriors from Novgorod and Pskov, led by Prince Alexander Nevsky. To the knights, this looks like an easy victory, but Nevsky knows this land. He knows the ice. He has a plan. What unfolds next is not just a battle. It's a masterclass in strategy that has been studied for centuries. Nevsky lures the heavily armored knights onto the center of the frozen lake. As the full weight of the Teutonic charge crashes into the Russian lines, the unthinkable happens. The ice, deliberately chosen for its weakness, begins to crack and groan under the immense pressure. Panic erupts as men and horses are plunged into the freezing water below, their heavy armor becoming a death sentence. The Russian forces, lighter and more mobile, press their advantage, surrounding and annihilating the disorganized crusaders. The battle on the ice was a crushing, humiliating defeat for the Teutonic Order. It shattered their aura of invincibility and decisively halted their eastward expansion into Russia. Alexander Nevsky was hailed as a savior, his victory immortalized in chronicles, legends, and later in Sergei Eisenstein's epic film, forever cementing the image of the treacherous knights sinking beneath the ice. Having been checked in the east by Nevsky, the Teutonic Order turned its focus to a different, more stubborn adversary. For over 200 years, they waged a relentless war against the last pagan nation in Europe, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. This wasn't a conflict of swift, decisive battles like Lake Peipus. This was a brutal, grinding war of attrition. The Order organized annual crusades, known as the Rise, where knights from all over Europe, from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, would travel to Prussia to join the Holy War against the pagans. It became a kind of violent religious tourism for the European aristocracy. They came seeking glory, salvation, and adventure, burning villages and enslaving populations in the name of God. But the Lithuanians were not easily conquered. Their lands were a maze of dense forests, treacherous swamps, and hidden forts. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, melting away into the wilderness, only to strike back when the crusaders were most vulnerable. They fought with a ferocity born from a desire to protect their homes, their gods, and their way of life. Unlike the Prussians, who had been subdued before them, the Lithuanians were politically unified and fiercely independent. The Order found itself locked in a seemingly endless struggle against an enemy that was as elusive as it was resilient. For centuries, the pagan fortress of Lithuania stood defiant, proving to be the Teutonic Order's most formidable and frustrating foe. The endless wars against Lithuania were costly and yielded little ground. The Order's justification for its existence, the conversion of pagans, was wearing thin. Then, in 1386, an event occurred that would seal the Teutonic Knights' fate. It wasn't a battle, but a marriage. Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania agreed to marry the young Queen Jadwiga of Poland. This was the Union of Krzywo, a political masterstroke that would change the map of Europe. There was one crucial condition for the marriage. Jogaila and all of Lithuania had to convert to Christianity. Overnight, the Teutonic Order's primary mission became obsolete. Their holy war against the last pagans in Europe was over, because there were no more official pagans to fight. But it got worse for the knights. The union of Poland and Lithuania didn't just remove their reason for war, it created a colossal new enemy. The combined Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was now a massive, powerful state, right on the Order's border. And it had a long list of grievances against the knights. The tables had completely turned. The hunter had become the hunted. The religious justification for their state was gone, replaced by the cold reality of political survival against a far superior power. The Polish lion and the Lithuanian wolf had united, and their first target would be the crusader state that had terrorized their lands for generations. The countdown to the Order's final, dramatic downfall had begun. What happened next would lead to one of the largest battles of the Middle Ages and the ultimate shattering of the Teutonic Order. We've seen their rise from a small crusading band to a formidable power. Now we witness the beginning of their end. The year is 1410. The stage is set for one of the largest battles of the Middle Ages, the Battle of Grunwald, or as the Germans would call it, Tannenberg. On one side, the elite, heavily armored knights of the Teutonic Order, confident in their divine mission and military prowess. On the other, a massive, diverse coalition led by King Władysław II Jagiełło of Poland and Grand Duke Vytautas of Lithuania. The air crackles with tension. For decades, the Order had launched brutal crusades into these lands. Now Poland and Lithuania were pushing back, determined to break the Knights' iron grip once and for all. Imagine the scene, tens of thousands of soldiers clashing on a vast plain. The thundering of hooves, the clang of steel on steel, the cries of battle. The Teutonic Knights fought with their trademark discipline and ferocity. Their Grand Master, Ulrich von Jungingen, even sent 2 swords to the opposing kings, a bold, arrogant challenge. But the Polish-Lithuanian forces had a plan. They feigned a retreat, luring the overconfident knights into a trap. As the battle raged, the Order's leadership was decimated. Grandmaster Ulrich himself fell in the chaos. By the end of the day, the field was littered with the white mantles and black crosses of the fallen. It was a catastrophic defeat. The Battle of Grunwald didn't just break the Teutonic army, it shattered their myth of invincibility. The Order would never fully recover its military might. Their long, slow decline had begun. After Grunwald, the Order was crippled by massive reparations and constant warfare. Their power was bleeding away. But the final, most astonishing twist in their story wasn't a battle, but a conversion. Fast forward a century to 1525. The Protestant Reformation, led by Martin Luther, is sweeping across Germany. The Grand Master of the Teutonic Order at the time was a man named Albert of Brandenburg. Facing internal rebellion, external pressure from Poland, and a personal crisis of faith, Albert made a radical decision. He met with Martin Luther himself, who advised him to abandon the archaic Catholic vows of the Order, get married, and transform the monastic state into a secular duchy for himself and his heirs. And that's exactly what he did. Albert converted to Lutheranism, secularized the Order's Prussian lands, and paid homage to the King of Poland, becoming the first Duke of Prussia. The very state built by crusading Catholic monks was now a Protestant secular territory. The knights who remained loyal to the Catholic faith were forced to relocate, their power now a shadow of its former self. This newly formed Duchy of Prussia, born from the ashes of the Teutonic Order, set a new course. It was this state, this Prussia, that would eventually grow, evolve, and, centuries later under the House of Hohenzollern, unite the German states into the German Empire. It's a stunning irony of history. The crusading state, founded to conquer and convert, laid the foundation for a modern secular nation. So, the Teutonic Order as a state was gone, dissolved into the Duchy of Prussia. But its ghost lingered. Its story was too powerful to simply fade away. In the 19th century, as German nationalism surged, historians and politicians looked to the past for heroic figures. They resurrected the Teutonic Knights, recasting them not as complex crusaders, but as heroic German pioneers who brought civilization to the East. They became a symbol of German expansionism, the Drang nach Osten, or drive to the East. The black cross on a white field became a powerful nationalist emblem. This romanticized myth took a much darker turn in the 20th century. The Nazi regime twisted the Order's legacy to justify its own horrific ideology and territorial ambitions. They appropriated the Knights' imagery, portraying their invasion of Poland and the Soviet Union as a continuation of the Teutonic Knights' historic mission. The Knights were warped into symbols of racial purity and military conquest, a historical precedent for their brutal policies. This manipulation shows how history can be weaponized, how the memory of a medieval order could be resurrected and distorted for modern political propaganda, forever staining their legacy. Our saga concludes here, among the silent, imposing walls of Malbork Castle in modern-day Poland. Once the headquarters of the Grand Master and the capital of the Teutonic state, it is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a museum. Walking through its vast courtyards and echoing halls, you can't help but feel the weight of its history. This castle is a monument to both incredible ambition and devastating conflict. It represents the pinnacle of the Order's power, a testament to their organizational genius and architectural skill. But it is also a reminder of the violence and holy war that built it. The story of the Teutonic Knights is a complex tapestry of faith and power, piety and politics, crusading zeal and colonial ambition. What do these stones tell us today? They tell us about the nature of empire, the dangers of mixing religious fervor with military might, and how the ghosts of the past continue to haunt the present. The Teutonic Knights may be long gone, but their shadow, cast by castles like Malbork, stretches across the centuries, urging us to reflect on their ambiguous and powerful legacy. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the history of the Teutonic Knights. It's a story with so many layers, and I'm glad we could explore it together. If you enjoyed this series and want to see more deep dives into history, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. We'll see you in the next video.